You are listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. Today is December 22nd, 2024, and this is another episode of Hearted Lite. We're going to revisit an interview that was first heard in a special bonus episode back in December 2020. The guest is my friend, Dolly Bicknell, who is a lighthouse preservationist and also the daughter of the famous Flying Santa of the lighthouses. To set the scene, the Flying Santa tradition traces its origins to a pioneering pilot in Maine named Bill Wincapaw. To show his appreciation to lighthouse keepers and their families, on Christmas Day in 1929, he loaded his plane with a dozen packages containing gifts for the lighthouse families in the midcoast Maine area. In the years that followed, Wincapaw expanded the flights to more of the Maine coast and to the other New England states. A few years later, the Wincapaw family relocated to Winthrop, Massachusetts. Bill Wincapaw Jr.'s history teacher at Winthrop High School was Edward Rowe Snow, who was a budding historian. Edward Rowe Snow took an interest in the Flying Santa and took part in the 1936 flights. Bill Wincapaw Sr. died in a plane crash in 1947. From the Christmas season that year through 1980, Edward Rowe Snow kept the Flying Santa tradition alive. The Hull Life-Saving Museum took up the mantle of the Flying Santa flights from 1981 to 1997, when a separate nonprofit organization, the Friends of Flying Santa, was created. Today, the flights by helicopter are primarily a show of gratitude for Coast Guard personnel and their supportive families. Edward Rowe Snow's wife, Anna Merle Snow, flew along with her husband each year, and their daughter Dolly took part beginning the year she was born in 1951. Dolly Snow Bicknell has been involved in lighthouse preservation as president of Project Gurnet and Bug Lights in Massachusetts. Dolly has been honored with a Keeper of the Light Award from the American Lighthouse Foundation and also a special award from the Hull Life-Saving Museum in recognition of her years on the board of directors of that organization and her work on behalf of many local charities. So let's listen to my conversation with Dolly Bicknell now. So you first went on a Flying Santa flight when you were 1 year old, or less than 1 year old, right? And I don't think you remember too much about that one, but what are some of your earliest memories of the Flying Santa flights?
Well, words like rough, bumpy. I loved that open window. As soon when he'd open the window to drop the packages out, it was just so nice. It was usually a 5-seat plane. I remember Piper, Apache, Aztec, Comanche. I don't know if those are real names, but I remember those. The pilot would always be in the front left, and my dad would be in the window right behind him with that special window that opened at the top. And then the front right would usually be a photographer, and behind him, next to my dad, would be my mother. And then I'd be in the back, in the middle, with packages all around me, packed left, right, up, down. And did I say rough and bumpy? I think I did. Yeah. Each year it would be, should we try Dramamine? Should we try no Dramamine? Should we try breakfast? No breakfast? Made no difference. It was rough and it was difficult. But I kind of knew it was kind of special because everybody was pretty happy when they saw him. So those are my earliest memories, I'm afraid.
Some not all that pleasant, but at least some nice ones too.
Nice.
So what was typically in the packages?
Cigars and cigarettes, because at that time everybody smoked, although my parents never did. But the Coast Guardsmen were into cigars and cigarettes, candy, lollipops, chewing gum, pens and pencils, sunglasses, balloons, rubber balls, paperback books, Gillette razor blades, puzzles, sometimes a doll or other toy, and always a copy of his latest book. And then he also had a self-addressed stamp postcard that read, "We have received your package," and would have a space for the lighthouse or Coast Guard station. And those postcards let him know that he could claim 94% accuracy over all those years that he flew.
I remember he told me one time that they tried, I think it was just once, tried ribbon candy.
Oh, somebody donated ribbon candy. What were they thinking? I think he ended up bringing a lot of that after he tried it, it broke. he brought it to when they would land, because sometimes there would be people who would be there and he could give that out there. But ribbon candy, you're right. I had forgotten all about that. Good for you.
That's pretty funny. The thought of dropping ribbon candy from a plane.
A plane was. That's right.
Did your father have sponsors or donors for the flights, or how did that work?
Well, he, a few sponsors like Gillette. I think Gillette always gave razor blades.
Yeah.
And some people made monetary contributions, but he ended up paying for about 90% of the flights, and including the flight insurance. And that kept getting higher and higher. And I remember him being so worried the last few years because, first of all, the FAA wasn't going to let him go low. And that was terrifying him because what do? You can't drop packages and have them come anywhere near there.
Right.
But also the insurance kept getting higher and higher. But he enjoyed it and he paid for 90% of the expenses.
There must have been a lot of preparation involved in getting ready for the flights. And I've seen pictures of you and your parents in the basement with all the packages piled up and everything. Yeah. What was involved in the preparation each year?
Well, our ping pong table, which never really saw the light of day anyway, was totally packed with everything. I remember I learned to tie a bowline knot because that was one of the first things we did. A 9-foot piece of twine with a bowline in it, and he would use that at the very end to wrap around the package, and that way you could carry it, but also it kept the package together. So there was a place to cut the twine, to tie the bowline. There were the piles of cigars and cigarettes and all the things that went into it. And they were individually wrapped with newspaper and then Excelsior, which is kind of a type of hay. And that was for padding and buoyancy. The buoyancy part was in case it didn't make the island or it ran into it or landed in perhaps a pond. And then brown wrapping paper that would be wrapped around everything, and then the twine. And at the end, if there was something like a doll or there was a family or maybe a dog, he would write S for stag, which meant no women, T for doll, F for family, and then dog on it. Uh-huh. He did put Gainsburgers in at one point. They were things that, and then, dog biscuits, those were also included sometimes.
Yeah. Can you describe what it was typically like flying over when you would fly over the lighthouse and your father was dropping the presents?
Well, first of all, he was not a pilot, and that's important. People sometimes think that, but he was not a pilot. But he seemed to have a really good rapport with the pilots. And then, as we said, he had a special window that opened up, and then the plane always read Flying Santa on it. There was something that they had put on so they could tell. And what would happen is we'd take off, and when we got near the lighthouse, we would start to descend, and we'd circle once or twice to let the people know that we were there, because he didn't want to hit anybody. People were pretty excited about the fact that this was going to happen, and they wanted to make sure they saw where the packages went, but he didn't want anybody there. And then as we were down close enough, when the pilot was where he wanted him to be, he would open up the window and balance it on his head. And I would hand him, or somebody would hand him, the correct package, because sometimes he actually wrote the Lighthouse on it, because he might have known somebody that he wanted to drop something special for. And then he would drop it out, and all I can say, it sounded like when he did it, because it would just get sucked out. And then he would lean out of the plane to see where it went, and then rinse and repeat. No, then he'd do it again, because there were usually once or sometimes he'd do 2 packages at once, but it depended on how big the island was. And then we'd do it one more time, and then we would go around again just to make sure that they got it. And usually the people would run, pick up the packages, and wave. And that was just really special. That was great. Yeah, that was really.
So I was wondering, I know that you said he had 94% accuracy overall, but I think the accuracy was much lower at some of the rock lighthouses or wave-swept lighthouses, places like Minot's and Graves Light?
Graves Light. No, Minot's Light was where I knew he would take 3 packages, tie them together, and try and loop it over part of the lighthouse.
Right. Did you see that in action? Do you remember seeing that?
I don't think so. I was thinking about that. I have pictures of the keeper holding up the package afterward.
Yeah, at Minot's.
I did not see that, but I remember him maybe reading about him saying that, or maybe him saying that.
There was some interesting ones in Maine, though, that you might remember, like Boone Island and Halfway Rock. I mean, those had to be interesting places because there's not much land around the lighthouse.
Right, and I remember going out to Halfway Rock afterwards once, on a summer's day, and thinking, wow, this would be good job.
Yeah, it depends whether it's high tide or low tide. There's quite a bit of rock around there at low tide, but not much at high tide.
Exactly. And I'm sure he couldn't plan that.
Right. You mentioned the people waving and everything. I'm just wondering if there's anything else that stands out in your mind as far as reactions from people.
Lots of jumping up and down. Funny, though, I remember him saying once that he got a letter saying, "Thank you for flying over. Why didn't you drop anything?" And he insisted that he had.
Right.
And the keeper found it later, wedged in the rocks.
Well, that still counts as a positive drop. Yeah, sure.
And things that had been out in the elements for a long time, the razor blades were always good.
Yeah, it's a good ad for Gillette. Any other memorable things that stand out for you? Just strange things or interesting things that happened during the flight?
Well, he would always lean out of the plane, and one time he lost his whiskers. Another time he lost his hat, his Santa hat, and he needed his Santa hat. I think we were supposed to be on television in Maine. We were going to land, and he had to go with the Santa hat, and he didn't have it because he had leaned forward. Mm-hmm. So from then on, he never wore the Santa hat in the plane or the whiskers. I think you reminded me recently that someone once mailed the whiskers back to him.
Right. I think he said, "Here's your beard. Now where's my package?"
That's great. Mm-hmm. I know one time the package that had been thrown out got stuck in the steering mechanism at the back. I don't know if that's called a rudder. I mean, that's what I'd call it in a boat. But well,
the tail mechanism. Yeah. It was near Boone Island, I think, when that happened.
That was terrifying because.
But were you there?
I don't know. I just remember him being very upset. Yeah.
Well, I've read about that, and they couldn't steer, but somehow, couldn't steer well, but somehow the pilot managed to fly it to the Pease Air Force Base in Portsmouth, which isn't that far from Boone Island, but that had to be the closest call in flying Santa history.
No, I couldn't have been there then. I would have remembered that, unless it was one of the times when I was really little. At Curtis Island Light, when the keepers had written a message on the island, and my dad was so impressed with this, he insisted that the pilot fly around and my dad took more pictures, and the pilot was very interested, and everybody was looking down. And I remember this. All of a sudden, the pilot looked up and went, "Oh, Mount Batty," and pulled the plane up because he was having a little bit too much fun looking at what was going on down below, and they almost hit Mount Batty.
One of the highest mountains on the East Coast, that for people who don't know. Years ago, for all the years your father was doing it, and before him, Bill Wincapaw, the primary purpose, although they did go to life-saving stations and some other places other than lighthouses, but it was mostly a way to thank lighthouse keepers and their families. And of course, the lights were automated over the years, and there aren't really traditional keepers anymore living at the lighthouses, although our friend Sally Snowman of Boston Light is the only official lighthouse keeper in the country these days. But the Friends of Flying Santa, the nonprofit, continues the tradition today, and mostly as a way to say thank you to Coast Guard families. And helicopters land at the Coast Guard stations, and Santa gives out presents to the kids there. What do you think? Is it important that the Flying Santa flights continue today?
I think it's important. The Coast Guard is taking the place of the lighthouse keepers, and they do a great job, and their families, they sacrifice time. The families, I think it's a great transition that has been made. In 2007, I received a call from Brian Tague, the president,
Right.
and he said that he needed an elf. And
Yeah.
first, I was so excited, and then I dreaded it because I remembered how bumpy it was. And then I went on this because Santa needs to have an elf to make sure his suit is perfect. He can't read the names of the kids because his glasses always fog up. He just needs a little assistant. And it was just wonderful interacting with the kids where I had never had a chance to do that before. And to watch how they loved him and how the Santa would say, okay, Jeremy, I know you've been a pretty good boy, but you should work a little harder in school and make sure you listen to your parents.
Yeah.
It's just wonderful to see that. Of course, these were fabulous Santas. But I've been an elf for 3 times. My daughter's been one, both my grandsons, and some of the pilots are amazing. They just say it's the best day of their year. You know, they love it. But I've also been on the ground when the Flying Santa came, and it still has the same magic to people of all ages. It's just a wonderful, I mean, I always cry when I hear the helicopter. Used to be a plane, but now it's the helicopter, and it's just very emotional.
It's magic. It is.
It is magic to see the adults and the kids and Santa and everything.
Our friend Brian Tague does so much work to keep it going every year. More work than anybody can imagine.
Yes, he does.
Why do you think your father devoted so much time, energy, and money to the Flying Santa flights for all those years?
Well, he was descended from a long line of sea captains on both sides of his family, both his mother and his father. And I think that he really appreciated lighthouses and their keepers even more because of that. In his book, The Famous Lighthouses of New England, the quote, can I read the quote?
Absolutely.
I think this is what he wrote in 1945. He said, lighthouses from the earliest times have fascinated and intrigued members of the human race. To almost every man and woman, there is something about a lighted beacon which suggests hope and trust and appeals to the better instincts of all mankind. Standing off by itself in the ocean, a lighthouse symbolizes the eternal vigilance of its keeper, who must be alert and watchful at all times, in sunshine or darkness, in fog or stormy weather. And I think that he really thanked them for doing that. The stories that he learned about the lighthouse keepers risking their lives, or the wives of the lighthouse keepers taking over when the husbands were away, they really were very special to him. But I think this is a way to give back. There must have been a reason, but I think this may have been it.
So what did you like best about taking part in the Flying Santa flights?
I liked the best part for me was when they were over. Okay, but really?
Yeah.
We got to land in Rockland, Maine and see relatives, dropping packages for my school. That was kind of fun.
Yeah.
One time they let me steer the plane because they thought that might help me not be sick, and it was fun. Seeing the beautiful Christmas lights on the way home when it was dark, on the way, when we were flying and not circling anything. It was exciting. It was rough. It was bumpy, but it was exciting. And seeing the happy, smiling people and the fact that somehow we were making people happy.
Dolly, well, again, thank you so much, and Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays.
Same to you, and thank you so much for having me on.
You can learn more about the history of the Flying Santa at flyingsanta.org. You can also help the nonprofit Friends of Flying Santa with a donation so they can keep the tradition alive as a gesture of kindness and gratitude to Coast Guard families. As with any small nonprofit organization, donations of all sizes are important and much appreciated. Again, you can find out more at flyingsanta.org. There are lots of good causes competing for our attention and donations, but I hope you might consider a donation to help keep this great tradition alive. Anything that calls attention to the important work and sacrifices of Coast Guard personnel and their families, and that also helps brighten their lives in the holiday season, is a very good thing. With that, thanks so much for listening. Be merry and keep a good light.